We're learning 2D arrays in Java. We're going to make 3 different 2D arrays. The first one is going to be a super simple 2D array. The second one we're going to fill up with a nested for loop. And the third one is going to represent a grid layout that'll kind of just look like a massive game of X's and O's.
Let's start out with a quick 15-second explanation of what 1D arrays are. Let's go int array numbers equals 1, 2, 3. When we make this, then Java would just go into memory and take 3 slots and put the values 1, 2, and 3 into those slots. The slots are called indexes, and the first one would be index 0, the second one would be index 1, and the third one would be index 2. So if we wanted to access the third slot, which is index number 2, then we could just type system.out.println numbers, a set of square brackets with the number 2 inside of them. So that'll access the second index. So we'll just get the value 3 printed to the screen. Now let's make a simple 2D array. We'll hold some jokes inside of it. We'll call it our jokedex. Let's go string array. And notice this time I put 2 sets of square brackets. That's how we indicate that it's a 2D array. We'll say string array jokedex equals new string, and let's make it 4 by 2. 4 by 2 just means that this is an array of 4 arrays. This is what our 2D array is going to look like in memory. We've made 4 slots, each having 2 indexes. The value in our first slot on the top here would be accessed by saying jokedex 0, 0. Let's put a value inside of slot 0, 0. Let's say jokedex 0, 0 equals want to hear a joke about paper. So that's inside of our slot 0, 0 right now. And in slot 0, 1, we're going to put the punchline for that joke. We'll say jokedex 0, 1 equals never mind, it's terrible. One of the benefits of 2D arrays is that these two values are linked now. Approaching this same situation with 1D arrays, then we would have one 1D array for the jokes and another 1D array for the answers, which becomes a lot more work if you want to do something like sorting or deleting an item from the arrays, because then any change that you make to one array you have to make to the other array. But with a 2D array, these items are linked because they're both at element 0. 2D arrays are really just arrays of arrays that are linked together. So what we've done here is we've made 4 arrays, each with 2 elements. And they're all linked together using the variable jokedex. Let's fill in another element in our array and just print it to the screen. Jokedex 1, 0 equals... As I handed my dad his 50th birthday card, he looked at me and said, "You know, 1 would have been enough." And let's just print these to the console. System.out.println element 0, 0 and element 0, 1. I'll just copy and paste that to print out our second joke. Go 1, 0 and 1, 1. I'm zoomed like all the way in Eclipse right now just so that the code's easy to see. The second joke's ending way over here since this font size is so big. So that is a super simple example of a 2D array. Let's do one that's slightly more complicated now. Let's say we want to store the number of points that 32 teams earned in a 82 game season. And we're not just going to track the total number of points, we're going to actually track the points that they earned in every single game. And then at the end of the array, in the very last element, we will have the total number of points for the 82 games. So total points is last element in array. Let's make a 2D int array called team points. And it's going to have 32 arrays inside of it. So it'll be 32 by 83. You can think of it as an array with 32 arrays inside of it, or you can think of it as a 32 by 83 2D array. Whatever floats your boat, whatever's easiest for you to conceptualize. Either way, we have the 32 teams in our league, and then we have the 83 slots for each team. 82 of those slots are to track the individual games and the points that they earned in those games, and then the very last slot is to track the total number of points for that team. And we'll fill this array up using a nested for loop, which is something you do all the time with 2D arrays, using nested for loops not just to fill them up, but to print out their values and do lots of other awesome things. Let's say for int I equals 0, while I is less than team points dot length. Team points dot length is going to return the length of the team points array. Team points array is just going to be 32 elements long, and each of those elements has 83 elements inside of it. The key point to remember is that length, when used on the 2D array name, returns the number in the first set of square brackets here. We'll go I++, and I'll put a comment in here just so that we remember that this loop is for each team. So it's going to go through the 32 teams. Inside of this for loop, we're going to put our second for loop. We'll say for int j equals 0, as long as j is less than team points I dot length. And this gives us the number of the second set of square brackets. So on the first pass through the loop, I will be 0, so we'll get the length of the 0th element in team points. And the 0th element will have a length of 83 because all of our elements have a length of 83. There is a way to set it so that each element in our array would have a different length so that they wouldn't all be 83 elements long. We'll get to that after. We'll go j++ to finish up our inner for loop. And this is for the 82 games. So for each team, it's going to loop through all 82 games for them. Once it's done doing that for one team, then I will increment and it'll do it for the second team in the array and keep going through all 32 teams. Inside of our inner for loop, let's just say team points I and j equals int math.random times 3. We'll assume that each team can score 0, 1, or 2 points in a game. 0 for a loss, 1 for an overtime loss, and 2 points for a win. For each of the 82 passes of this inner for loop, I is going to remain the same because we're giving points to the same team for all 82 of their games. Whereas j is going to change for each pass of the inner loop. It'll change from 0 all the way up to 82. We should alter that a little bit actually because we said that the last element in the array would be their total number of points. So for the inner loop, we'll go length -1. So that'll reserve the last spot in the array so that it won't get filled with a random number. And we'll just say team points I 82. 82 is the last element in our array. We have 83 elements numbered from 0 to 82. In the last one, we'll put plus equals team points ij. So for each pass through the inner for loop, however many points the team got in that game gets added to their total points. And then for each team, let's just print out their total number of points. System.out.println team points I 82. So at the top, we have the stuff from our other arrays. And then for each 32 teams, we get the total number of points that they scored in the 82 game season. Let's make another 2D array. We'll call this one game board. 2D char array game board equals new char array. We'll make it 9 by 9. And let's fill up our game board array with empty dashes to represent empty spaces on the game board. We'll write a method for it. I'll just call it fill game board, which will take the game board. And then I'll go show game board, which will pretty much just be an exact copy of fill game board, but instead of filling it, it will just system.out.println every element inside of it. These will be pretty quick to write. They're just nested for loops. Public static void fill game board 2D char array game board. And we'll have a for loop inside int I equals 0 while I is less than the length of the game board I plus plus. And for int j equals 0 while j is less than game board I dot length then j plus plus. And inside of the inner for loop, we'll just say game board I j equals dash inside of single quotations. For 2D arrays that are representing grid layouts, the first set of square brackets represents the row, and the second set of square brackets represents the column. The elements are still stored the same way they are before. They're not really stored in a grid layout. We're just using the array to represent a grid layout. So we made our 2D char array 9 by 9. I'll fill in Excel what that would actually look like in memory. We'd have 9 arrays numbered 0, 1, 2, all the way up to 8. And inside of each array, you have 9 elements also numbered 0 to 8. So this spot right here, A5, would be 0, 4. That's row 0, column 4, because the first square brackets in the 2D array represent the row. I'll delete this after, but just to show what I mean, this spot right here, 0, 4, would be slot 0, 4 in the array. That's row 0 and column 4. Let's print it out, and then it'll be a little bit easier to conceptualize. Let's just copy and paste our fill game board method and rename it show game board. And then instead of game board ij equals dash, we'll just put system.out.println game board ij. And let's put some labels in here as well. Before we print out the for loop, I'll just print out the numbers from 0 to 8 in a row across the top of our game board. And then inside of our outer for loop, I'll just put system.out.println value of I, so that'll show up along the left side of our game board. I'll throw in a 0 up here since we're starting at 0 with elements. And before we print this out, actually, these should have been system.out.print, because we don't want it to jump down to the next line after printing out every single character on the game board. What we do want is a system.out.println after the inner for loop runs every time. And we'll just print an empty line. Just to make the game board a little bit more clean, let's also put a space in between each character. We'll see how this looks. I'll throw a space in after the I as well, actually. And let's go with an extra space at the top. This should look okay. So for each pass of the outer for loop, an entire row is getting printed out. So all 9 values in that row get printed out. And then when it's done printing out that inner for loop for the first row, then I turns to 1 and the next row all prints out again inside of the inner for loop. And one awesome thing about arrays is that we don't have to pass back the filled up game board once the method's done running. Because arrays are stored inside of object reference variables, then this array looks the same in the main method right now as it did in our fill game board and show game board method. So if we printed it out inside of the main method, then it would print out exactly the same as it did in show game board. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, then I do have a video on object reference variables versus primitive variables and how Java passes them around and stores them in memory. So I'll put a link to that in the description. You can also initialize 2D arrays on the same line of code that you declare them on, the same way that we did with our 1D array numbers up here. So if we make 2D int array numbers 2, then we can put a set of curly braces, and inside of those curly braces we're going to put more sets of curly braces separated by commas, and then we can put the values that we want inside of here. So we could go 1, 2, 3, and in our last one let's put 99, 108, 67. So we've just made a 3 by 3 two-dimensional array. Each of the sets of curly braces inside of our main set of curly braces is an array. each of them having 3 elements. Sometimes you'll see people write this out a little bit differently. It's the exact same thing, just on different lines, which can make it a little bit easier to read. When you initialize your array in the same statement as your array declaration, then it's also possible to make what's called a jagged array, which is a 2D array where arrays inside of the array can have different lengths. So you could say 1, 2, 3, and 4 for the first array. And in the last array, we can make it a few elements longer. And these would still print out okay inside of nested for loops, as long as we use the length attribute of each of those inner arrays. If you're pretty comfortable with 2D arrays and you want to go on to learning about array lists and objects, then I'll have some links in the description to my videos on those. I'll also put some links in the description to some awesome coding books to check out.